none of us trust media anymore. Trust in the media has plummeted to an all-time low. Every night when we flip the news on, we know they're feeding us things that are absolutely not true. We know that they're omitting things that we really want to know about. 2 weeks ago, this show was about an election allegation that was mentioned in a federal lawsuit. No media outlet would touch it, did touch it, or has touched it since. I want you to consider that for a second. The media is either unwilling or more likely too afraid to simply discuss an allegation that is meaningful for the next election in a federal lawsuit. They won't even mention it. That's where we are. And it's the perfect example why none of us trust the vast majority of the benevolent journalists as they broadcast from their elite coastal ivory towers. They push an agenda. Many times it's their agenda or a progressive agenda or the agenda of the White House. Anything that threatens that agenda, they hide, they omit. But tonight, I'm exposing another big one. And after tonight's show, honestly, you will be asking yourself all the way through the show, how are these people not in jail? Here's how this show is going to work. This would have taken at least 2 or 3 shows when I was on at Fox. We have a big chalkboard we have to go to tonight. We're just going to let the show run. So it may be 70 minutes, maybe 90 minutes. We don't really rehearse these, so we don't know. But we're going to cover all of it tonight and give you a plan of action. Tonight, we're going to expose the very dark world of gender-affirming care. I think you're going to be as horrified, disgusted, and angered as those of us on my program have been for the last couple of months. It is insane. Where did this movement come from? Because it's exploded all over the past decade, or did we miss something? People identifying as transgender make up 0.5% of the United States. In other words, half of a fraction of society. But with an army of NGOs pushing the cause and millions of dollars spent to lobby politicians and influence legislation, it looks like a lot more than that. This is an article from The Atlantic in 2016 asking a question that no media outlet in the country today would even remotely feel safe to ask. The question, is the trans lobby disproportionately strong? This was in 2016. Long before there was a trans woman, meaning a biological male, at the HHS. Who was pushing this lobby? Why was this such a big ticket item for them? Again, we're talking about 0.5% of the adult population here. Look, I get there is a small amount of people that genuinely have gender dysphoria, but it's 0.5% of the population. What's going on? Why so much lobbying, legislation, and money? What is the real agenda? Well, I want to show you this website. It tracks funding for trans issues, and you'll never guess who some of the biggest funders are in the top 5. Oh, let's see. Number 1, Open Society Foundation. In other words, George Soros. Number 4, Tides Foundation, George Soros. 707,000. This is George Soros. A lot of this is coming from... When will people begin to recognize the damage this one man has done? We think that George has a soft spot for medical conditions, and it's just represented by a small fraction of society, but he deeply cares. Or is it maybe that this topic has exploded into one of the most divisive issues in the country? Which do you think it is? Which is more likely? But Soros isn't alone in sending big-time dollars to fund heavily divisive issues. Guess who else is involved? China. 2 billionaires who are close to the Chinese Communist Party are pouring tens of millions of dollars into trans issues. They're doing it here in the United States, but curiously, they're not advocates for it back in China. Odd, isn't it? Surely not because it's dividing our country. That surely cannot be it. Up until about 8 or 9 years ago, most of us knew next to nothing about gender dysphoria. Bathroom laws seemed dangerous. But the really became a dividing issue when the lobby centered on one area: our children. A recent report found that the amount of kids identifying as transgender has nearly doubled over the past few years. The rate of adults has stayed relatively the same, but it is exploding among kids. From the Times, quote, "Experts say young people increasingly have the language and social acceptance to explore their gender identities, but the numbers also raise questions about the role of peer influence or the political climate of the community." Gee, you think so? There's a whole lot of money and power ensuring that this issue pushes peer influence on our kids. Just buckle up for tonight. There's almost a story every day exposing another teacher pushing transgender identity on children without parental consent. If the media had any credibility at all, they'd call this for what it is: an influence operation, propaganda. And if the words influence operation sound a bit too much, take a look at this document. We saw this recently from back in 2019. Only adults. Good practices in legal gender recognition for youth. This document is straight bananas. It reads like an intelligence operation to remove consent from the parents. Take a look at who released this. It's a network of small activists group under the umbrella of something called the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, Queer, Intersex Youth and Students Organization. It's quite a mouthful. It's very catchy. Now check into who their partners are. The Reuters Foundation, as in Reuters, the news agency, and a law firm called Dentons. No big deal. It's just a group of lawyers rated as, quote, the world's largest law firm. This document was produced to be, quote, a powerful tool for activists and NGOs working to advance the rights of trans youth, end quote. You want to push an agenda? You want to do an end run around parental consent and rights? This is the guidebook to get it done. This is how an army of activists, NGOs, the media, and even politicians took a small medical condition that's real and centered it on your child. It goes in depth on how to successfully run an influence operation. They targeted young politicians. They instructed the opening salvos of the movement to demedicalize the campaign by focusing on gender recognition and stay away from what would later mean medical treatments. They instructed the army of NGOs to get out ahead of the government legislation by bombarding them with progressive legislation before the government had time to develop their own. They advised framing, also called manipulation, to center the issue as a human rights issue. This one's wild. They warned that pushing trans issues, specifically on children, would be hard to sell to the public, but they had a plan. They suggested tying these campaigns to already popular campaigns, like marriage equality. If anyone has wondered how the T made its way into LGBTQ acronym, this is why. And finally, they advised avoiding excessive media coverage when possible, as in keep it on the down low. But don't let the people know too much, because they may not like it. Confusing kids was meant to be done in the shadows. It was meant to be quick and silent, a rollout targeting the government and media, and it was piggybacked on top of marriage equality. Now, I could do an entire show on this alone, but we have so much to reveal to you tonight. I don't know how long this portion of the show, because not all of it, we break off at the top of the next hour, so we don't know how much of it is going to be left over to continue the show with. If we get into the second part of this show and we're still on YouTube, it will immediately be taken down. It probably will be taken down. We'll probably be demonetized for this. There is an army of activists frantically hitting the report button, probably as we speak. Like the election show a couple of weeks ago, we decided to make tonight's show longer than usual and more uncensored than usual. We will stop broadcasting on any other platform but our own at the end of this hour, but it will be free. The final portion will be live exclusively on BlazeTV. We also wanted to give everyone a chance to see it. So for 24 hours only, this full and extended uncensored episode will be free on BlazeTV and my X account at GlennBeck. No one else is willing to tell these stories, so we ask that you go to blazetv.com/Glenn and subscribe with the promo code RECKONING. You will get $30 off your annual subscription, but you'll also join us in this fight, help bringing the truth from the darkness to the mainstream media. I can guarantee you if I was at Fox today, not only would it take me 3 days to tell this story, I don't know if I would have been on the air for those 3 days after today's episode. There is a reckoning that is coming, but we can only do it when there are millions of us based in truth and hand in hand with fact, standing together against this evil agenda. We begin in a minute. First, let me talk to you about caring for your dog. It can be a lot of work. You have to be the one to make sure that he stays happy and healthy, and that involves doing a lot of things you wouldn't otherwise do. You gotta play with him, walk with him, feed him, be responsible for his medical care. And you can't kick him out when he turns 18. You know what I mean? All right. Here's what you need to do. You need to make the right nutritional decisions. And if you feed your dog kibble food, which I do, I always thought it was good. I really did. All the really important stuff is cooked out of it, and then they spray the flavor on for the dogs. It's nothing in there that's really very good. Rough greens. This is not a dog food, but if you feed your dog kibble food, you put this on top of the dog's food. Created by naturopathic Dr. Dennis Black, full of vitamins, minerals, probiotics, antioxidants, you name it. If it's healthy for your dog, it's probably in rough greens. Most dogs love it. Uno was the pickiest eater ever. We literally used to have to hand feed him. It was like, come on, Prince, enough. Try it out with your dog. You'll see what I mean. They change. In all good ways. Roughgreens.com/Beck. Call 833-GLEN-33, 833-GLEN-33, or roughgreens.com/Beck. All right, the trans movement shifted its focus to children, and that's why we have a big problem. It is pretty obvious to see why people like George Soros and even the Chinese have jumped on board this train. It doesn't get any more divisive than this because it involves our children. It is also fairly obvious why a few whacked out doctors and experts have entered the fray as well. Have you ever seen how much gender-affirming care costs? Let me show you. Bottom surgery is $137,000 per procedure. Now look how much the insurance company pays out. $133,000, nearly the entire amount. Bottom surgery on male, over $56,000 for the procedure. Insurance foots most of the bill again. Removing a healthy uterus is $16,000. Healthy testes, $8,000. Removing breasts, $15,000. Almost all of it covered by insurance. Have you ever gone in and argued with your insurance company because, I don't know, your kid has a broken arm and they're like, are you sure? Are you really sure he has a broken arm? I don't think he should have it set with a cast. Those are expensive. And you're arguing with the insurance company. They don't have any of those arguments with the insurance company. There's the annual cost for hormones that go on forever. But by far, the biggest potential cash cow, puberty blockers. The yearly cost is over $2,600 a year. The insurance pays essentially the entire thing. Puberty blockers. We're talking about children. You want to talk about the universal human right to puberty? That might be one. As I showed you earlier, the lobby to target our children is exploding. But the experts say this is all just good science. Really? That's weird. What about the experts that recently released a study in the Netherlands that found most gender-confused children actually grow out of it? What about these experts from the Mayo Clinic that found puberty blockers could cause long-term health issues for boys? If all gender-affirming care is good science, then why did the British Health Service recently ban puberty blockers for kids? Why did Sweden, the first country to introduce legal gender reassignment, begin restricting hormone treatments on minors? What about the new British study from pediatrician Dr. Hilary Cass, who found, quote, children presenting with sudden onset gender dysphoria are actually suffering from other mental health diagnoses, not true gender dysphoria? Why are these experts being dismissed and the other experts, who you're going to meet in a minute, are being listened to when it comes to our kids? Most importantly, who are these experts that most of the medical profession and our government are getting their information from? Well, here's Admiral Levine from Health and Human Services.
Well, transgender medicine is a established type of protocols and procedures and treatments. It is based upon decades of research. There is a new standard of care from the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, published in September 22. It is based upon medical research that continues to evolve.
By the way, she doesn't make a beautiful woman because she's a man. Now, who is that group that he mentioned? The World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Now, I had never heard of this organization before we started doing research on this show. Their standards of care, they are the literal book advising doctors and governments all over the world on compassionate transgender health care. These are the ones. They're referenced by the HHS, as per Rachel Levine, but also the National Institute of Health. The American Medical Association even recognized WPATH training courses for licensing credits. Who the heck are these people? This is where it gets fun. To understand WPATH, you really need the entire transgender movement history. Now, I could go all the way back to the turn of the century in Germany, and it is fascinating. Look up 1925, first transgender surgery of a man in Berlin, and you'll begin to see where we're headed. But anyway, we begin in 1952 for this case. It's the United States, World War II veteran, this guy, George Jorgensen. He had gender transition surgery, and treatment had been a thing up until 1930, but then it all died down until him. This story ran on the front page of the New York Daily News. Ex-GI becomes blonde beauty. George Jorgensen. He traveled to Denmark in 1951 and enlisted the services of Dr. Christian Hamburger, who was willing to castrate him and make what was left of his healthy sex organs look like female genitals. I mean, really? So he made chopped meat out of, Dr. Hamburger did that. Anyway, Jorgensen brought fame and a spotlight to transsexualism, and upon arriving back in the United States, he became a patient of Dr. Harry Benjamin. This guy, who is he? Well, he was a German endocrinologist who was fascinated by the subject, but had zero formal training in sexology. While World War II vet was brought Benjamin fame and funding and notoriety and a whole bunch of other stuff, Rita, brought all kinds of stuff to him. Erickson was transitioning to become a man, but she was also using her massive wealth for transgender causes. She funded the first international symposium on gender identity, as well as Harry Benjamin Foundation. It was during this time that Dr. Benjamin coined the term transsexual in his 1966 book, The Transsexual Phenomenon. Erickson also used her wealth to fund the first gender clinic in the country, where? So, George has his chopped meat by Dr. Hamburger. He comes back to America. Benjamin, who has nothing really to do with anything, but this transgender person wanted to make sure that Benjamin could chop his meat as well. He started funding a bunch of money. Actually, I think I'm misgendering. I can't tell, but I think he was originally a woman. Anyway, so all that money, everything funds a clinic at Johns Hopkins. Now, here's where it gets crazy. Because it was at that clinic that Dr. John Money conducted unethical experiments on children born with sexual development disorders. One of the most tragic was his patient named David Reimer. David Reimer, this guy should have gone to jail for this. Dr. Money convinced David's parents to raise him as a girl. After all, gender is a social construct. Isn't that what we would hear today? Dr. Money's experiments are where that comes from. He was hailed as a pioneer. Glorified studies were written on his work. During the same time, Money continued to perform sex changes on adults. He claimed a smashing success, all right? David Reimer would later say that he never felt like a girl. He always knew he was a boy. He would eventually, tragically, commit suicide. A review at Johns Hopkins was done on Dr. Money's patients in 1975. It was found that there was no change in their psychological functioning. The clinic was shut down in disgrace in 1979. Despite all of this, the left still celebrates Dr. Money to this day. Schools give him accolades. They pony up scholarships in his name. Dr. Benjamin's name was immortalized as well with the creation of the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association in 1978. Their standards of care, which is now used all over the world, began to get published. Remember the guy? These people, they're making the standardized care. In 2002, the chairperson of their standards of care, Dr. Stephen Levine, resigned from the organization. And I want to quote, why did he leave? A regretful conclusion that the organization and its recommendations had become dominated by politics and ideology rather than by scientific process. 5 years later, they rebranded this discredited group and they changed their name to WPATH. These are the people and history behind gender ideology in America. This is what guides gender-affirming care on people, including children, all over the world, including our own government health system. Most of the world doesn't know who WPATH is. I wouldn't know who they were if it wasn't for my next guest. She's the one that put this book out. We go there next. Okay, the end of the week, it's Mother's Day, and you've got your mom or maybe your wife in mind. But I want you to think about another set of women, young, pregnant women in distress. They don't know what to do. Women being pressured not to choose life for that baby. Women who don't know where everything that baby is going to need will even come from. When a distressed mom comes into preborn, she's welcomed with open arms and offered free ultrasound to hear and see her baby's precious life that's growing inside of her. The majority of time, once that happens, she'll choose life for the baby. Then preborn keeps helping her for 2 years after birth. This Mother's Day, can you help bring life to both a mother in need and her at-risk baby? One ultrasound is only $28. You're saving 2 lives, mom and child. If you're a business owner, perhaps you can consider a larger donation for a write-off, because we know the government isn't working on saving any babies. This all has to come from us. A donation of $1,000, $2,000, even $20,000. All gifts are tax deductible and will reach eternity. Get involved today. Dial pound 250, say the keyword baby, pound 250 keyword baby, or visit preborn.com/Glenn. Preborn.com/Glenn. Well, most of us were still blissfully unaware of the horrors of WPATH. My next guest was poring through hundreds of pages of leaked internal communications that exposed the group as an ideologically driven, pseudoscientific, medically unethical group of activists passing themselves off as medical professionals. She was working with Michael Shellenberger's organization, Environmental Progress. Her work has paved the way for the reckoning that must come for these experts who are medically experimenting on some of the most vulnerable populations around the globe. We're talking about people who are mentally handicapped. We are talking about people with schizophrenia, not getting consent, informed consent. She has collaborated with us to write the form letter we're asking you to send to organizations like the APA and AMA and AAP later on in the program. We have some homework that we want you to do, but they are preparing today. The Pediatrics Association has come out. The American Pediatrics Association came out just a few minutes ago and said, we just want you to know we're based in science, all of our procedures, and we should be able to do them, whenever we want without any threats. Welcome to the researcher with Environmental Progress, Mia Hughes. Mia, thank you. I know the toll that it has taken on my staff to go through all of these things. Thank you for doing this for the world. Can you tell me, where did you get, this is from a leak. Who leaked it or why did they leak it?
I actually don't know who the source is, or perhaps there's more than one source. So whoever it is gave the files to Michael Shellenberger. I write for Michael Shellenberger, and I had been covering gender for a number of years, including investigating WPATH and writing about WPATH. So when these landed on my desk, I was happy to tell the true story about WPATH, because I think if you want to understand this medical scandal, you must understand the group that sits at the very core of that, and that is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health.
So, so you don't know if they came from inside, because we're gonna show some of these here in a few minutes, and it is really just a conversation between the players, showing how they very unscientifically come up with the treatment plans.
What I do know is these are all messages that come from inside WPATH's internal messaging forum. We have confirmed that they're all real. So the person who gave them to us was inside WPATH's forum, taking the screenshots.
Okay. Tell me who these people are. I mean, it is a terrifying mix of, I don't know, pseudoscientists, crazy surgeons, and activists. Who gave them the power? Why? How did this happen that every real, legitimate medical organization is following their recommendations?
It's a remarkable stunt that they pulled. So what makes WPATH so dangerous is precisely what you just said. It's a hybrid organization where there are surgeons, endocrinologists, clinicians, family doctors, all mixed in together with extremist trans activists. Now, I will say that all of those medical professionals are themselves activists, probably first, and then medical professionals second. But this is a group that has been around since 1978. In the early days, they weren't quite so dangerous. But then around the turn of the century, they took a turn for the ideological. They kind of abandoned science and were pursuing politics. They rebranded in 2007 as the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And at that point, I tell it as they self-identified as the world leading professional association. Wow. They had no science at this point, and they still don't have any science. And so
I talked to Michael today before the show, Michael Shellenberger, and I said that, this reminds me of the Tuskegee experiments. This reminds me of the sterilization nightmare from the early progressive eugenics. He said to me, and I think it is on the path to very, very, very dark things if we don't stop this. He said to me he thought this was the biggest medical scandal, I think he said in the history of the world, but yeah, in all of human history. That's what thank you, Ricky just said that in my ear. In all of human history. That's quite a statement.
I'm completely convinced that that's true. There have been many medical crimes in the past. We all think lobotomies, but you're right, Tuskegee was terrible. But this one is especially egregious because the victims are children, adolescents, and some of the most vulnerable adults in society. And I challenge anyone, if they think that I'm exaggerating, that this is not a terrible medical crime, take 5 minutes to go on trans TikTok and watch all the videos of teenage girls prancing around with mastectomy scars because some monstrous doctor has amputated their healthy breasts while they're still in a stage of identity development, and they simply just need to be left to grow up, mature, and settle into who they are, find their identity. This is truly the worst crime I think the medical world has ever committed.
And they take it so, I mean, they're just so crazy. I just read in one of their emails back and forth to each other, they removed the breasts of somebody and the nipples, and they were like, if they change their mind, they can just tattoo nipples on their chest. It's like, what?
Right. They'll perform mastectomies and do customized scars. Say somebody wants a special pattern for their scars. They'll create second sets of genitals for people who identify as both male and female. They'll nullify people, meaning remove all genitalia and have a smooth, sexless body if these people identify as neither male nor female.
So we're talking like, we used to joke about, smooth like a Ken doll.
Precisely.
I don't even know how that works.
And how does that mesh with the Hippocratic Oath to first do no harm? The
Amen.
Hippocratic Oath has long been abandoned by these people.
When you first got this, what was your first impression of this group of insider emails?
Because I had been writing about WPATH for some time, and because I had been following them for some time, it was a part of me was, this is WPATH being WPATH. But the more I read, the more I realized just how much influence activists with no medical training have on the care of some of the most vulnerable people in society. And the more I read, the more horrified I became. And, for me, the worst part, I think, was, apart from reading about the surgical complications, was reading about the really detrimental effects of testosterone on the female body, reading about healthy teenage girls being put on testosterone, suffering from vaginal atrophy, bleeding after sex, uterine atrophy. And just, the way nobody is sharing any science in there. You see, the internal messaging forum is Doc Matter, and it's where doctors are supposed to congregate and share science and improve patient outcome. What's happening in WPATH's internal messaging forum is political activism, and nobody is sharing any science. And the reason no one's sharing any science is because there isn't any. There's no science to say what to do when a teenage girl gets vaginal atrophy because you pumped her full of testosterone. There's no science because nobody's doing it.
The APA just came out just a few minutes ago and made the comment that their gender care is all scientifically based. We know that it's coming from WPATH, do we not?
We do. We know that. So WPATH produced a standards of care in 2001. That was standards of care 6, devoid of science, but sort of pro-affirmation. And then the Endocrine Society based their guidelines in 2009 on WPATH standards of care. And then in 2012, WPATH produced their Standards of Care 7. At this point, there's no science at all. And yet from 2012 onwards, all of the major medical associations, including the
APA,
American Academy of Pediatrics, they base their guidelines on WPATHs, but WPATHs is based on no science whatsoever. So it's actually, I would go so far as to say that this is fraudulent. And now the AAP is already named in a lawsuit, standing accused of civil conspiracy and fraud for its 2018 policy statement on gender-affirming care. I would like to see WPATH also named in a lawsuit because they are arguably even more fraudulent.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I hope you haven't had any pushback. Have you had any serious pushback from WPATH or anybody else?
Well, they made a statement that was just empty and absolute nonsense. I didn't take it seriously. And trans activists, of course, were not happy with the report, but they're never happy with anything I say.
Yeah. Mia, thank you so much. Thank you for everything. You bet. She did work with us on something that we need you to send to these organizations. We need to hold them accountable. That'll be coming up in just a few minutes. By the way, all of the stuff that we're showing you tonight, all of the things in here, you can find it at glennbeck.com. There is it's tagged right at the beginning or pinned right at the top of glennbeck.com. You just tell us your address. We'll send everything to you, including those letters. We'll tell you more about that. When we come back, we're going to be joined by a detransitioner and her lawyer who is suing the medical professionals who say she says coerced her into a double mastectomy at 16 years old. That's coming up. So let me ask you, if you're living with pain in your life, you've had enough, haven't you? Aren't you tired of trying the next thing and the next thing and the next thing only to end up back where you started? Living day in and day out with pain, I went to every doctor I could find. I mean, I tried everything. And the only thing that worked would always make me feel loopy and spaced out, and I didn't want to live my life that way. Then my wife made me try Relief Factor, and I got my life back. It's a daily supplement that helps your body fight the pain that's fighting inflammation. Look, it doesn't work for everybody. About 30% of the people stop taking it after the 3-week trial period. And I like Relief Factor because they tell you 3 weeks, give it 3 weeks, take it as directed for 3 weeks. If you see any changes, then continue to take it. If not, it's not going to probably work for you. Give it a try. ReliefFactor.com. ReliefFactor.com, 800-4-RELIEF. That's 800, the number 4-RELIEF. In July 2017, Luka Hein was diagnosed with gender identity disorder. 55 minutes into her first appointment. 55 minutes. By October, Luka was referred to a gender clinic for a double mastectomy. She underwent the procedure when she was 16 years old. Her therapists and her physicians led her to take testosterone for 4 years and even encouraged her to have a hysterectomy, which, thank God, Luka's parents didn't allow. By the time that she came back to her OBGYN to report that she was detransitioning, Luka was so physically and mentally compromised by all of these medical interventions that she could barely get out of bed. Her OBGYN said, "I guess this is just part of your gender journey." Now Luka is suing the professionals who failed her. She's here with her lawyer, a good friend, Harmeet Dhillon, to tell us about the case. Luka, how are you?
I'm good.
Thank you for coming in. I know this has to be hard for you to tell the story. When I first read that you were 50 minutes in or 55 minutes in to your first appointment and they diagnosed you, what did they ask you in those 55 minutes? What did they say? What do you remember?
I remember being asked stuff about how I felt about my body, how I felt about, socially, what gender I wanted to be perceived as. Pretty stereotypical questions about interests and, self-perception.
But not anything about your mental health in any other way?
No. Matter of fact, most of the other mental health struggles I had at the time were pushed to the side, it seems.
By them?
Yes.
Yeah. And so what were your parents saying at this time?
My parents, just like a lot of parents that get caught up in this, they cared about their child and they were worried because they saw that their child was in distress, and you have professionals that are bringing up that this is the only path forward to deal with these issues.
Right. So you had your breast removed.
Yes.
Thank God you didn't get a hysterectomy. When did you realize it was a mistake?
When I was 20 years old.
And then what happened? How did you?
And then everything felt like it came crashing apart. It felt like I had been so disassociated from my body that when it all came back together, it felt like the emotional equivalent of being hit by a bus and trying to pick up the pieces in the aftermath.
So you're not, I mean, your voice, was it always deep like that?
I always had a little bit of a deeper voice than some of my classmates, but it was definitely altered by testosterone, largely. And this is me, I guess, trying to sound a little bit more normal.
Okay. And you can't change that, and you don't know if you can have children.
I do not.
This is, Harmeet, terrifying to me, because I've had this conversation with my kids. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We've talked about this stuff because it's all over, everywhere in their life. And Tanya and I have talked about it over and over, saying, I don't know what I would do. What would you do? Because what your parents face, there's nobody saying you're a good parent by saying no and saying, snap out of it. You will grow past this, most likely. When you heard her story, how much of a case does she have here?
Well, she has a great case, and the sad thing is that this is the third such client that we have taken on with very, very similar stories. And if you had told me 5 years ago that this was what was happening and pervasive in America, including in states like Idaho and other, red states, I wouldn't have believed you. But this whole issue came to our attention as the Center for American Liberty when we learned about parents who were having their elementary school children's social gender transition being concealed from them deliberately by teachers. And so we took on a case to sue a school district in which we won a settlement. We took on a second case, which is being argued in the Ninth Circuit this month. And from that, the publicity around those cases of parental rights, I began getting literally hundreds of phone calls from families around the country. And they were heartbreaking because the end result of most of these transitions for young people is failure. The vast majority of them end in a child who continues to believe because medical professionals are telling them this is just part of their transition. They cling to it. They keep doing it. They end up on the streets. They kill themselves. Suicidal ideation goes up. So it is all a lie that they're being told by the medical professionals.
What laws were broken? Or because they lied to your parents, didn't they? I think you had to go for breast surgery when you had your breast removed. There was a time when the doctors were covering all of this with your parents. Is that true?
My parents were never made aware of the fact that the majority of children with this kind of distress could grow out of it, or that there could be something else causing my distress. Once the gender topic was brought up, it felt like anything that had happened to me in the past few years, including very serious stuff, like being groomed and sexual trauma, that just got pushed to the side. It was, like I said, the magic words by bringing up the gender topic. And then from that, just went rolling with it.
So what laws were broken?
Yeah, so the basic fundamental premise is that medical professionals are regulated by the state. And when they commit medical malpractice, a citizen who's been harmed by that can sue them. And so that is really the basic premise of these cases. And that is that these medical professionals failed on multiple levels. First, they failed to consider the real causes of the trauma that this child was going through. They failed to identify comorbidities like sexual trauma, like body dysmorphia that is not gender related. Many young girls had that when I was young, anorexia, et cetera, and so many other things. And then when they hear the G word, the gender word, which children pick up from TikTok and from their school teachers and from their, classmates, that's it. That's the end of the conversation. There's no attempt to diagnose the underlying issues. And then they peddle the lie, the expensive lie, to families that this is the only solution to the medical problems that are being presented. They also conceal from families the studies that have been going on for many years in Europe and in the United States even. WPATH has actually been shown to have been concealing from families,
Right.
the professional association of these doctors, all of these facts about how this surgery doesn't work on most people and these treatments don't
Okay,
work.
give me a second because we have to break here in a minute. We are going to be leaving all of the other platforms, everything, the rest of this conversation, because we're going to open up the chalkboard, names, things that are going on. It's a whole different language and a whole different world we'll get to. But that will only be available, and it is free for 24 hours on BlazeTV. So if you're not watching BlazeTV, make sure that you go there here in a couple of minutes. It was 2 months ago, maybe 3, that I asked my staff to look into these. I think these people are sick, really deeply disturbed. We are making permanent records of all of this. What Michael Shellenberger was leaked to and written out by Mia Hughes, I think is one of the most disturbing medical truth bombs ever dropped. The information is vast. We did our own digging, our own findings. You can find them at glennbeck.com, and the rest of this exclusively on BlazeTV.